introducing Dr. Karen Stout. And as we all know, Karen does not need an introduction. She is a visionary leader and has led ATD to do some fabulous things for community colleges across our country and even here in North Carolina. Not only is she a thoughtful leader and a caring leader, but she also is someone who reminds us constantly about why we are doing this work. She engages us in courageous conversations, focusing on the why. And she puts the student voice in the center of what we do. Karen has been a great influence, I know, for many of us here in North Carolina with the work ATD has done. And she has been a supporter of many of our presidents through different venues that she's engaged with about giving us the courage to do and have those courageous conversations on our campuses. Over the years, and actually a few years ago, as AJ mentioned, Dr. Stout presented a lecture for the Dallas Herring Lecture Series on teaching and learning. And in that lecture, there were some words that really stuck out for me, and they were about urgency, about presidents being in the center of the conversation, about understanding what was happening on our campuses about teaching and learning, about the engagement of the faculty in the work and teaching and learning, and the relationship between the president and the faculty and the work that's happening across the campuses. Dr. Stout left us, as AJ mentioned, with a challenge, and today we're going to continue that conversation with her as she looks at setting the stage as we go into more in-depth look at teaching and learning on our campuses, looking back and looking ahead. We did include in the chat the lecture of Dr. Stout so that you have it. If for those of us are new to North Carolina, we wanted to make sure that you had that outstanding, I would say, foundational piece for us to begin to work on our future. So with that, Karen, it's always a pleasure to have you. It's always a pleasure to welcome you back to our North Carolina family and to hear your thoughts.
Well, thank you, Mary. It's great to be back in North Carolina, if only virtually, with all of you, as well as with friends and partners from the Belk Center and the College Excellence Program of the Aspen Institute. And I'm just thrilled to be more deeply connected with the Belk Center and North Carolina as the new chair of the Belk Center's advisory board. So AJ, thank you for inviting me to offer some opening reflections this morning. Mary mentioned it's been just over 2 years since I delivered the Herring Lecture in North Carolina. And in that lecture, I did challenge us as a field and as leaders to think about centering teaching and learning in our redesign efforts. And in that lecture, I've offered some reflections on the arc of the student success work. And those reflections were based on campus practice, something that I think ATD has a unique voice around. And those reflections came from ATD's founding in 2004 all the way through 2018. And what I saw as our tendency as leaders to work around the margins of innovation and to try to scale in areas where data might tempt us to shape what I call siloed and disconnected interventions without tackling the more systemic approaches that fully address student motivation and the overall quality of teaching and learning, our core mission. So my general hypothesis then was that community college leaders did not see teaching and learning as a key thread for improvement. And that in fact, as leaders, we had a blind spot. And I did argue, as Mary suggested, that creating a greater sense of urgency for centering teaching and learning in our reform work was long overdue. And I challenged us as leaders to activate the potential of our faculty, given that the faculty has always been and will most likely always be the most frequent point of contact, ongoing contact with our students, and that they are in practice our scalers. So in the lecture, I offered 5 building blocks for leaders to consider in designing a culture of teaching and learning excellence, borrowing from what we were learning in the field at the time about how successful colleges that were accelerating student success gains and also reducing equity gaps, how those colleges were building a culture of teaching and learning excellence as a strategy to accelerate and sustain gains in student success. And just really quickly, because I think this is important when I move to some of the reflections that I'm going to offer, the building blocks included adopting continuous improvement models to drive innovation in curriculum and pedagogy, creating hubs for innovation in our colleges to make improvements in teaching happen. AJ mentioned the work with the teaching and learning centers, and we believe that teaching and learning centers can serve as the hub of this work if the center is faculty-led and intentionally aligned with the institution's student success agenda. The third block was supporting faculty in approaching their work in understanding the diverse set of lived experiences, skills, and knowledge that their students bring into the classroom. And we argued that faculty need help in seeing their students in context, where their students are struggling, what they do not know, and what's hindering their progress. And then connecting faculty with deeper support to help students, both inside and outside their classrooms. The fourth was delivering and investing in an explicit adjunct faculty engagement strategy. And the fifth was committing to driving the design of a truly student-centered institution through teaching and learning. And in that assertion, I took ATD's capacity model. We have this wheel that puts student success in the middle and then is surrounded by 7 capacities that we believe are foundational for colleges to build a student success culture. And to the dismay of my team at ATD, I took that wheel and I put teaching and learning in the center and challenged us to think about new ways of aligning the other 6 capacities to teaching and learning. So what would it look like if we align leadership and vision with teaching and learning, data and technology with teaching and learning, equity with teaching and learning, our communications and engagement strategies with teaching and learning, strategy and planning, and policies and practices? What would that culture look like? And we did, after the lecture, have a really engaging meeting with many of the Belk Center advisory board members, and some of you were in that meeting where we talked about what presidential leadership would look like within that context. So, what is new since that lecture? How has the teaching and learning landscape changed, and what are the implications for leaders? Well, the pandemic, the ongoing impact we see of systemic racism, and January 6th has, for me, brought a new sense of urgency for leaders to actively center teaching and learning as a lever for accelerating equitable learning and student success results. So, in early 2020, at the start of the pandemic, an article in the Chronicle of Higher Education spoke about an adjunct faculty member who worked in the community college sector in Alabama. A single mother, cobbling together teaching sections. Each morning, she packed up her laptop and her teaching notes and her 3 children in her RV, and she drove 11 miles to the local public library parking lot to get access to Wi-Fi to teach her classes while her 3 children engaged in their own remote learning. That story really hit me. COVID, of course, has laid bare the deep vulnerabilities of the students we serve. Vulnerabilities that hit our sector in quantitative numbers in the fall. We saw the vulnerabilities in the spring. We saw the numbers in the fall, as we saw enrollment drops of 10% at community colleges and greater drops for Black, Latinx, Indigenous, male learners, and student parents, as well as significant reductions in new student enrollment. That was the transition of recent high school graduates into our colleges. And we all doubled down to work harder to understand our students, to center their voice, to move supports their way, You worked heroically as college presidents last spring and all fall, identifying every student and high touch approaches to keep those students enrolled. Our faculty were able to see these student needs in new ways. And Zoom, I think, has a way of revealing struggle, hurt, anguish, multitasking in ways that the classroom does not. So the faculty story made me think about whether, and juxtaposed against the student story, made me think about whether we as leaders really understand the deep vulnerabilities of our faculty. Do we know our faculty? Are we finding ways to listen to them to understand the supports they need in this environment to succeed? And what have we learned about what they need that we will intentionally scale and sustain post-COVID? Faculty attending Achieving the Dreams teaching and learning webinars last April and May, sometimes 700 at a time, shared their struggles in making the transition to new learning modalities and their frustration with the general lack of institutional support, investment, and empathy required to help students make the transition. As part of the Herring Lecture, I challenged us to lead with questions, yet for us to effectively lead with questions, we also have to be strong listeners. It's only through listening that we engage, understand, connect, and empathize in a way that develops wisdom and meaningful relationships. So what venues are you using to really listen to faculty? And are faculty a key stakeholder group that you intentionally and actively engage with? After George Floyd's murder, like some of you, ATD issued a statement to our network challenging our colleges to center racial equity in their work. We looked at 165 colleges in the Achieving the Dream network, and we saw impressive gains in 3-year success rates for all students, but significant equity gaps remain between Black and white students and Latinx and white students. And many of our colleges have reached out for equity support. And we've focused much of our work in the recent months with faculty on building culturally responsive teaching practices. I offer this note, or this quote from Bell Hooks that offers a point of view on the powerful connection of teaching and learning to equity and social justice. I celebrate teaching that enables transgressions, a movement against and beyond boundaries. It is in that movement which makes education the practice of freedom. So we must help our faculty dismantle the pedagogical practices that perpetuate the inequities in student outcomes. And this will require us as leaders to tend to our own reflective practice and learning to understand how white privilege manifests itself across many of our traditional systems and structures in our colleges. While I made a reference to the connection of equity to teaching and learning in the Herring Lecture, I did not explicitly suggest that you ask yourself this question: how are you strategically and intentionally tying your teaching and learning work to your institution's equity goals? But I am suggesting that now. And finally, on January 6th, we were challenged as leaders to think, especially if we believe that community colleges are democracy's colleges, about what our students are learning. I must admit that I have paused and thought about the guided pathways movement, its strengths, and its potential blind spots. And I've asked myself questions about how we are shaping our curriculum to build critical and analytical thinking, civics, and information literacy skills and knowledge. And whether that is through the general education experience, through work-based learning, through service learning, or through contextualization into short-term occupational programs. But whether we're really strategically thinking about what students are learning in addition to what the labor market value of the learning experiences are. In the Herring lecture, I spoke of teaching and learning as a broad concept that included the in and out of the classroom work that faculty are involved in. But I did not challenge us as leaders to hold a point of view about the shape and the form of the curriculum. So, back to learning from practice and translating this learning into implications for leadership. Since the Herring lecture, ATD has deepened our teaching and learning work with our colleges and in collaboration with state systems, student success centers, and with the Belk Center. And we're seeing the field move in meaningful ways around teaching and learning and faculty professional development. A few new insights that were not as clear when I did the Herring lecture 2 years ago. From our engaging adjunct faculty in the student success movement, we saw the difference it makes in student success when colleges support all faculty. Comparing students taught by full-time and adjunct faculty, we saw they were equally likely to pass or fail the course, whether taught by full-time or part-time faculty. But the students taught by adjunct faculty were less likely to progress on to the next course we would expect them to take, even when they had success in the first course. And that suggests that colleges were not providing or are not providing enough support to adjunct faculty for them to informally advise students on their academic path. From our digital learning work with 7 ATD colleges within the National Every Learner Everywhere network, we've learned that providing faculty with student performance data supports their use of differentiated instruction and just-in-time instructional intervention that meets students where they are and improves learning outcomes for all students. And that faculty development and communities of practice are key drivers to scale the use of evidence-based and high-impact practices across disciplines. And from our multi-year OER degree effort, which we're expanding this year to go deeper in understanding pedagogy, we learned that supporting faculty professional learning helps to reinvent teaching with OER, as well as reinvent the student experience. With these results, institution-wide implementation of OER not only saves students money, but students enrolled in these OER courses earned additional course credits compared to students in non-OER courses. And the initial upfront financial investment that colleges made to launch their OER degree programs was, by the end of the nearly 3-year study, offset by increased reuse and scaling of OER materials and tuition revenue from additional course enrollments. So these insights and findings reinforce what we're learning from a growing body of research, that teaching and learning are key to improve student success and to closing the equity gaps, that faculty are crucial actors in shaping student learning experiences and building student success, and that faculty professional learning is vital and well done. It supports faculty to learn about and adopt new approaches to their courses. It advances change at scale, and it stimulates the growth of a teaching and learning excellence culture. So we know that we will not scale or sustain the growth of this teaching and learning culture without your leadership. Presidential leadership is critical. With the lecture, with reflections from recent events, and with learning from new research that I just articulated, I think there are some closing thoughts that I'd like to leave with you as you begin to work together today. These come from a combination of conversations with presidents in the field, but also some reflections from some work that ATD is doing with the leadership of the Aspen Institute for new presidents. So some of the North Carolina presidents that were with us last weekend might recognize a few of these reflections. So shape and own a vision for teaching and learning excellence. As a president, Shape and own a vision for teaching and learning excellence and make it a priority. Link it to the things that you can control as the president. Budgeting, for example. Shape a strong and collaborative relationship with your chief academic officer and set clear expectations for the alignment of teaching and learning as a priority with your board, with your executive team, with the deans, the department chairs, student affairs leaders. Build a talent management strategy that includes faculty, that defines faculty competencies, hires to the competencies, evaluates to the competencies, links professional learning to the competencies. You get a sense of what I mean. And I think we have evidence you can do that work in union and non-union environments. Develop an analytics infrastructure that touches faculty at the level of practice. Think about your presence and being proximate to the work of teaching and learning. Your presence offers powerful signaling about your priorities. And find your voice around teaching and learning and exercise it. So I send you off with words from Eduardo Padrón. I use these in the lecture, I share them again. If we are to meet the challenges of learning in this time of change, teaching must be central to our success. I really admire all of you and I appreciate the work that you do. I wish we were together in person, but I want to thank you and the Belk Center and our Aspen partners for giving me this opportunity to share what we've learned at ATD over the past several years about teaching and learning, as well as some reflections that are more of the moment and that to me accelerate the sense of urgency that I put forward in the Herring lecture and I believe is even more urgent now. So thank you. Thank you, AJ. Thank you, team. I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Karen. Always you share with us such insightful concepts, ideas, research, and reflections of the work that you're doing with ATD and the work you're doing with presidents across the country, and we can't thank you enough. The urgency is there. You know, when I think about what you said 2 years ago, you know, that word urgency might have been one capital letter and then the rest of it was all small letters, and now it's all capital letters and it's flashing urgency, yes. Urgency, you know, and that we have to rush and kind of get to the work. And you always inspire us that, you know, continuous improvement is really the goal, and that the center of this work is our students, but highlighting the value of our faculty and the role they play is really essential. And I can't thank you enough for the reflections, and we'll obviously have more conversation as we go through the day. So as we move on in our agenda and kind of build from Karen's thoughts, we have an opportunity now to hear from another college president, Dr. Antoine Reese, who is the president of West Kentucky Community and Technical College. Dr. Reese and I had a conversation about the questions I was going to ask him and reflections he might have on the role of the president in this teaching and learning concept and in this environment that we are in. And it was interesting to me as I read his bio, and I could share with you a very extensive career that he's had over the last 30 years. And we've put his bio in the chat so that you can see it. There was something that really stood out as I did a little research and looked into his work and what he's doing on his campus. And he identified, he was asked the question, you know, how would you sum up your leadership style? And this is what he said. He said, my leadership style is about empowering others to find their voice by achieving their educational and career dreams with direction and with purpose. Empowering others and finding the voice. When you look at what has happened at his college, it is pretty clear that the faculty and the staff at the institution have embraced that opportunity. and they have maximized a culture of excellence and intentionality that focuses on high expectations of student learning and student outcomes. This has been recognized nationally, the work that is happening at his institution. In 2011 and in 2015, the college was honored as a Aspen finalist with distinction. Last year in 2020, West Kentucky Community Technical College was named again as one of the 10 finalists for the 2021 Aspen Prize for Community College Excellence. It's really amazing, Dr. Reese. This is the 5th time that you are a finalist, and it speaks to your leadership. It speaks to your institution identifying, developing, and scaling strategies that propel all students to not just complete college, but also to succeed after graduation. When you look at West Kentucky Community and Technical College, they have achieved strong 3-year graduation and transfer rates above the national level for the last 3 years. In doing that, they use data to improve student learning through an exceptional culture of faculty engagement in improving teaching and learning, and leading to measurable improvements in student success. They have dedicated their work to improve lives beyond their own doors. They have engaged in efforts such as partnering with local organizations, outreach to minority students, and maintaining programs that allow students to earn college credit while completing high school. And finally, they bring together state-of-the-art facilities, customized training for businesses and industry, and college courses to meet the technology needs of the regional labor market. Dr. Reese, it is a pleasure to have you here in North Carolina and to hear your thoughts about presidential leadership and the work that you've been doing at West Kentucky. What I'd like to do is we could start off with a question. So you've done great things and you've been recognized, and congratulations to you and to your faculty and your staff. But to achieve that type of excellence in teaching and learning, can you describe your perspective of what are the unique strengths that are at West Kentucky and how you continue to excel in advancing excellence in teaching and learning at your institution?
Well, first, thanks, Mary, for that kind introduction. Definitely want to also thank Keith and Millicent and Amara for our prior conversation. I don't know who canceled, but I'm seizing this opportunity today to hopefully share some thoughts and insights with you, as mentioned. So perspective, I think, is really important, meaning that, as you mentioned, West Kentucky Community Technical College has a long history of striving for excellence, but it really begins with talent, right? All our respective institutions, we recognize we will only go as far as the caliber and the quality of faculty and staff that we have. So we were very fortunate. We were, prior to '97, we were under the University of Kentucky, which is the flagship for the Commonwealth of Kentucky. The community college system was under that, and we followed basically all of the policies, procedures, as you can imagine, associated with promotion, tenure, right? So there was clearly a very rigorous promotion and tenure process as part of that organization, if you will. So we were very fortunate that as a college, very early in, that we were able to not only attract and bring it on board, but continue that legacy of high expectations and excellence with teaching. We, during that time, we led efforts, what was then known as developmental education. We basically led, 30-something years online delivery, which is now a norm. We also had the only Cisco certified professor in the entire state at our campus. So I use those as examples that it does indeed begin with the talent. Second For us, we all follow various standards, right? Be it accreditation through SACS or the various programs that we have. We adopt and see them really as like minimum standards, meaning that we want to press beyond, right? So it's always about stretching and pressing beyond to take, our standards of excellence, if you will, up to that next level. Certainly, including, as I listen to Dr. Stout, we've been part of Achieve the Dream and Aspen and Bellwether and best colleges. I mean, these national organizations do outstanding work of really keeping into the forefront the importance of excellence, student success, all tied into teaching and learning. The last part I would mention too, though, on my watch, I've been very intentional of really pushing the envelope of really defining excellence. And how do you achieve excellence without equity? Don't think you can. And basically, do we have continuous engagement with national best practices, best research, and talent? So a lot of intentionality in terms of professional development is really key. So again, to summarize, we're only as good as our talent. I would tell you, though, that it also brings a challenge because in the last 5 years, we have certainly had our share of retirements of outstanding faculty. And we not only lose outstanding faculty, but the institutional knowledge as well would be among some of the reasons why we've kept this legacy of excellence.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, as a new president, when you came to the institution, and we have a number of new presidents in North Carolina and across the country, what gaps did you see? And how did you leverage existing strengths at the institution to build that urgency for continuous improvement?
Well, so let me put by way of context on this as well too. My pathway to the presidency is different from this perspective. I come out of broadcasting news. I worked for many years with multicultural affairs, student activities, student success, before coming on the academic side with first year experience, student success centers, et cetera. So the gaps, if you will, is a reflection of those combined experiences, if you will. So one gap for me that stood out immediately was getting a sense in terms of the role of our teaching and learning center in onboarding new faculty. Because the fact of the matter is that, right, not all faculty are created equal, meaning we have some faculty who may come directly from business and industry with practically no teaching experience. We may have other faculty coming from other two-year colleges, community colleges, but that may have been a different experience. And certainly we have some coming from the four-year experience as well. These experiences are not all the same. And so the role of the Teaching and Learning Center and how we onboard our new faculty felt that there was some gaps, thus opportunities for us to shore that up with more intentionality and who's involved in that process of onboarding new faculty, which of course would include your master teachers, your deans, and et cetera. Second, our students. I consistently ask these questions. I would encourage my colleagues listening today as president. Here are my series of questions. Who is missing and or not engaged in class, in those successes that we want to all work our students to doing? Who are the faculty and staff working with our highest risk populations? I got to tell you, it took some engaged conversations with our CAOs and academic deans and academic council to, begin probing a little deeper in terms of who exactly is working with our high risk populations and the pedagogy thus that would inform what that looks like. I will tell you from my own experience that you need to be attentive as presidents because it could be intentional or unintentional. In some scenarios, you end up where those working closest through their own policies and procedures become practically gatekeepers. And silos could also be created, particularly in those classes, again, which we previously referred to as development. Of course, we all use the co-model of college and development, but integrated reading, first year experience, challenge courses like math and science, intentionality in terms of who is working closest. Do they have the level of support, training, etc.? I found that in terms of gaps that there are a lot of technology tools, right? Because as mentioned, the action happens in the classroom, but then students spend quite a bit of time outside of the classroom seeking intervention and support. And so, like many of you, we have a lot of tools, you know, Starfish and Civitas, PeopleSoft, Signalvine, etc. Those are tools, but it needed to be, from my perspective, more comprehensive. The last point I would mention too is this, is that, which is always, I think, a tension or a sensitivity point. So I believe that sometimes in the academy, through the teaching and learning lens, we confuse rigid with rigor. So oftentimes there are a lot of policies and processes, and right, that are rigid, but not necessarily rigorous. And then the associated support that is needed to get our students, if you will, ready to fully engage in the learning experience.
So Dr. Reese, it's pretty clear that you are engaged in the teaching and learning agenda at your institution, and in many respects you own it. I want to, if you could share with us a little bit about how you articulate that vision of teaching and learning across the campus. How do you communicate that? How do people know that Dr. Antoine Reese, you know, is there and is committed to this work?
I would say two things: delicately and boldly, both at the same time. So we know that as presidents that there's always a heightened awareness that when it comes, if you will, to the academic portion of the house, the core, as we would say, of the teaching and learning experience, that falls with our chief academic officers, their deans, right, program coordinators, division chairs, etc. I would say that it is important that you have a strong relationship with our academic leaders. I always try to be very intentional, particularly with the chief academic officers, because I would argue it's probably in many days, perhaps the most thankless role, because you got to balance both meeting the faculty needs and the associated teaching and learning support and needs of students, and at the same time, the administrative end of things. But with that being said, the president plays a pivotal role, I believe, in setting the tone, the temperature, the expectations for the organization as a whole. I believe that as presidents, we have to be intentional in leaning in more as to where, quote, we stand and or our vision and expectation when it does come to teaching and learning, because you will not achieve the retention, the graduation, the level of success without teaching excellence front and center. So it takes that intentionality, you know, as mentioned. And so I think it is important for presidents to make time to be able to engage in conversation and dialogue with the academic councils, the academic leaders, about why teaching and learning is important from our experiences and expertise as presidents, and ways in which we can shoulder and support those efforts. And again, it's a balancing act, right? Because, you know, oftentimes when administration gets involved, you know, there's that sense that we're trying to, quote, tell, you know, in this case, the faculty what to do. As presidents, I guess my counter will be, well, we play a part in telling just about everybody what to do. Why would we exempt something as important and as central and as core? So it is important for the president to have a vision, engage, I believe, share research articles, best practices, and provide opportunities and incentives that promote and foster teaching and learning excellence as elocuted from the president.
Dr. Reese, are you willing to share with us what you see as your vision for teaching and learning for your institution?
My vision for teaching and learning, there's two, if not three, key aspects of it. One, as I stated earlier, teaching excellence should and must be grounded in equity. We are an open door institution. By proxies of our mission, we say basically, hey, come on in. All right, we will take you regardless of station in life, ethnicity, level of preparation, etc. So equity to me is very, very, very important. In teaching and learning and for the organization as a whole, one of the resource materials that I emailed out is about some best practices in multicultural organizations. That's a great resource. It also brings some reflective practice work from Dr. John Peters and Dr. Dave Schumann, who were both leaders of the teaching and learning experience at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, where I was for 13 years. That all basically undergirded, if you will, to me, the importance of, again, equity in teaching and learning. Second, I would continue to state so heavily for all of us, through our own learning experience, we could pretty much list by name and by year the master teachers. We have a lot of teachers, but for some reason, there are some teachers that they have this incredible ability through their presence, through their experience, through their delivery, through their pedagogy, to simultaneously bring, if you will, students into that, immersing them into that teaching and learning experience, recognizing that students do have different learning styles and are at different levels. So I think it is important that we highlight, showcase, utilize, mobilize intentionally our master teachers to serve as mentors, to help new faculty to shadow and do the peer evaluations and all those sort of things, is a second part of what we want to see here as part of the teaching and learning experience. And third, boldly, I believe it is important that we also, if you will, showcase our talent to our external stakeholders. We have incredible faculty with incredible expertise and insight, many that align even as we speak with some of the nation's challenges around COVID-19 and social inequity type issues. Would be my three pieces, if you will, that I would want to emphasize. And certainly, when all is said and done, in order for students to find their voice, that they are successful navigating to and through the experience here at West Kentucky Community Technical College.
I have a number of other questions I'm going to ask you, Dr. Reese, but I do want to offer to our audience, if they have a question for you, to please put it in the chat and we will try to incorporate it in this conversation. Let me follow up a little bit on something that you mentioned, and that was about equity. And it's clear that in the work that's being done at West Kentucky, you have definitely looked at the equity agenda at your institution. And you had mentioned here about, and I'd specifically like you to share about your goals for faculty diversity.
Yeah.
And why you believe that really matters in teaching and learning on your campus.
It absolutely matters. And my first point of emphasis would be that our faculty, our staff, our students, our community, when all is said and done, they look to us as presidents to set the stage. So it starts at the top. For me, that means it starts with my cabinet. If you go on my website and look at my cabinet, it's about 50% diverse, both in terms of ethnicity and globally as well. That was with intention. Some of my colleagues have cabinets that virtually have very little diversity. I think it's hard to make a case about your level of commitment to it. Within all of our mission vision statements, we mention equity and diversity on some sort of level, but it starts at the top, and it starts with the representation of our leadership at the cabinet level. And then second, certainly in the classroom, it is vital for students to see individuals who look like them. That credibility, it removes the guesswork and expectation of, is it even possible to achieve, right? To learn and to succeed when you see individuals who look like you. So for me, not only by stating it, but literally, I took my cabinet, the deans, and we did some road trips. So where we are geographically in Paducah, we're about 2 hours from Nashville, 2.5 from Memphis. So we spent some time collaborating with colleagues in Nashville, also in Memphis, including University of Memphis, even though it's not a historically black school, it's a PWI, but because of the Shelby County population, we felt then in terms of our hiring efforts, we wanted to make connections but for me, it was important for the academic and the senior leadership to be in the forefront, witnessing firsthand the importance at the local regional level. Well, it's going to be my 5th year. So every year, I started what is known as the Educational Express. So I take my entire team to every county where we celebrate Education Day. We engage the political, religious leaders, but I also showcase some of our top faculty and their areas of expertise. In the Commonwealth of Kentucky, there's been a huge emphasis on the 5 high wage, high demand, which are like the technical pathways. So we bring the experts, if you will, to share firsthand about what they do and how it can boost and support and grow, particularly in our areas of declining population and competitive things economically, are some ways. Third, I would continue to harp on professional development opportunities. I put quite a bit of money in professional development. I believe it is important, as I say to my team every year, including myself, somewhere in North America, somebody is doing what we're doing at another level. Somebody is also being successful in meeting this ongoing challenge of diversifying our organizations. So we have to then participate in groups like NCORE, as an example, the National Directors of Chief Diversity and Equity Officers, right? And the list goes on and on. Of course, AACC, Dr. Dukes is in this discussion today. I'm sure she could share the Larkin Institute as an example. So there are resources, there are opportunities for us as leaders to set the stage, but it begins at the top through the representation and reflection of our cabinets, senior leadership, who is in the classroom, and then the supporting cast, the advisors, student success coaches, and tutors, using some peer models where students can also see their peers in that support world, I believe are some of the specific goals that I have for diversity.
So one of the things that is a highlight, and thank you for that, that I recognize, and also in the work that you've done, and also has been recognized by the Aspen Institute, is the work that you've done with business and industry and K through 12 and for your partners. And we have a question in the chat. If you would speak a little bit about how you are engaged with your external partners, how you got your team to be engaged, how they play a role at your institution, and a little bit about where you see that going in the future.
2 or 3 pieces. So one, like many of you, you get invitations to do presentations to various groups and organizations. I had an easy choice. Well, I could absolutely show up, quote, and do my thing. But as a team-oriented fellow, I believe it is important that the institution, that we shift from what I call the Lighthouse Effect or the Field of Dreams effect, where we often rely on our reputation that, kind of like build it and they'll come, or we're here and people know that we're here. I wanted to shift that where we took that externally. Part of convincing my team or encouraging my team, spent quite a bit, again, with me sharing through my experiences, certainly in prior roles with recruitment, enrollment, retention, success efforts, that you can use all of that as a synonym for relationship. It's relationship building, but it's relationship building with credibility, which means that we got to be visible, we got to be engaged, we got to be frequently engaged, right? And not just the annual drive-through type thing, because there's a credibility gap. Let me hover a little deeper in that. So 2 things that brought me back to this area. I felt there was unfinished business regarding population decline and opportunities to grow and diversity gaps. We have predominantly in this area, it's African Americans and Hispanics regarding diverse groups. You have long histories of perceptions of our institutions, particularly going back to the segregation days, as not being friendly and accessible. So this work, and that work continues to be there. When we consolidated with what is known as West Kentucky Vocational Technical College, which from in the 1900s all the way up to 1970, was a teaching college, for Blacks only. And so we got a deep history, but the perception and the level of engagement, right? Again, that's where that needs to continue. our Hispanic communities in some of our rural areas, with the national challenges around immigration and DACA, et cetera, what is this huge suspicion and sensitivity, right? And some levels of leeriness when we talk about engaging those sort of populations. So for me, it was also important having those candid, sensitive, but intentional discussions to my team as to what we need to get out to engage. But as importantly, I link everything back to our respective mission and vision. We are open door institutions. Within our missions, we always talk about student success, teaching and learning, and workforce development, right? That three-pronged approach. So it is who we should be and what we should do, but it requires us to go out as opposed to seeing others come to us. The last piece, I would say that I was very intentional. The two things that I wanted to do, by way of my media background, I guess I could decently market and promote some things, and certain things that I believe very deeply in. For our K-12 partners, which is a very vital stakeholder, I started the annual regional educators awards for all K-12. So we do an Oscar style, literally red carpet, the whole nine, just as you would at the Oscars, and we dress it up and glam it up, and we give great awards. It's a very competitive process. This is now going into our 4th year, and we have several hundred, teachers who, as part of the national conversation, have felt overlooked on many levels, underpaid, disrespected, et cetera. So the timing of that was great. And then we also do an annual business symposium where we bring together about 100 business leaders from around our region. And two of the core conversations is around more diversity in their respective business and industry areas, and retaining 20 to 40-year-olds, young and diverse in the region.
Outstanding. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to follow up with one final question. We were going to run out of time, but I think that this is a question that your perspective on would be really appreciated. And it has to do with the unique challenges we are faced in this current environment in advancing teaching and learning. And what insights might you have for presidents as they go forward in what Karen refers to as this, in big capital letters, the urgency and the external factors that are having a profound effect on our leadership as community college presidents?
Very important and powerful question that Karen underscored. Let me hover with this urgency. As we speak, we are still trying to navigate through this dual pandemic of COVID-19 and certainly racial and social unrest and equity issues. A missing voice with urgency, I would submit to you, is higher education leaders. We need to boldly be part of that conversation. There's, prior to COVID, and we all always had these conversations about the value of higher education and some public perception of value. We need to control the script, manage the script, lead the script about the sense of urgency that to and through COVID and beyond, the more people that we can get educated, trained, ready to work, that benefits all a society. So for me, there is a sense of urgency, but it is undergirded with, we must have the boldness then to insert ourselves, if you will, into the narrative. Is a crowded marketplace of opinions and thoughts, as you know, but I think we'd be very intentional in being part of that. A quick example of that, I hosted, I'm the current chair of the chamber, and we hosted open dialogue and forums with many of our diverse and underrepresented businesses that did not get the opportunity for PPP, that type thing, and our challenge in terms of resources, workforce training, and education, and our small business as a whole, like many of you, are facing those challenges. Well, there's an opportunity for me as president to talk about how the college is center and part of, right, meeting those needs and leading, would be my quick response.
Well, Dr. Reese, we're going to run out of time, but I want to thank you so very much. Clearly, your leadership style, as you stated it, as being empowering and giving people the chance for a voice, is clear. You not only have the words, but you have executed through the actions at your institution about empowering not only your faculty and staff, but your community and the vision for the citizens and students that you serve. So I appreciate your time with us. I'm sure that others across the network here in North Carolina will be engaging with you, and know that you are always welcome to North Carolina and to be part of our community college family.
Thank you so much. Thank you much again for this opportunity.
So I believe I'm going to pass this on to Millicent.
Thank you so much, Mary, and thank you again, Dr. Reese, for joining us today. So we'll now be moving into breakout groups to reflect a little bit on the conversation that you just heard, and think as well about your own personal definition of excellence in teaching and learning. There'll be some questions posted in the chat box in a moment, and they are also located in your participant guides on page 5. That's the document that Julia emailed out earlier this week. So you'll have some time with the facilitator to discuss these discussions, and we'll come back together at 12:35. When we come back, we'll be taking a break. Thanks so much. See you all soon.
Work we're going to be doing here in North Carolina. And as AJ and Karen shared with all of you, we have a partnership between ATD, the Belk Center, and the Aspen Fellowship, not just the fellowship program, but the College Excellence Program, in this work on teaching and learning. And over the next year, we're going to take a deeper dive into this conversation. Today, we really were just providing you a foundation and understanding from both a national perspective, and also we're going to be soon hearing from our own presidents about what's going on in North Carolina around teaching and learning, and how we can really improve upon the teaching and learning experience for our students. And the significant question for all of us as presidents is, how can we as a president be strategic in driving improvement in teaching and learning at the college? That is the question. And it's the question I think that Karen particularly asked all of us to continue to explore in our courageous conversations that we have, not only with ourselves and in the context of our role, but also having those courageous conversations across our campus. So I want to just kind of share a foundational piece here, and that has to be next slide, please. I think you all have seen this before. This is the Aspen Institute College of Excellence Program Framework for Student Success. And these are the pillars through research and the work that the Institute has done across the country, and in the visits they have done for the Aspen Prize. I've identified really these 5 distinct pillars that really are the strength of our community colleges. And over the spring, we spent quite a bit of time talking about equity and about the importance of equity. And this next year, as we've shared with you, we're going to be talking a lot about learning. And we really are going to propose a couple of questions for you under each one of these categories. And particularly in learning, we're asking, do colleges set expectations and measure learning and use that information in a process of continuous improvement? That really is the key question. And then as a president, how do you know that's really happening? And then what do you do about dealing with not only the strengths in your organization about improving it, but also dealing with the challenges that you might have, so that you can meet the expectations that we tell our students that they're going to have as a result of an experience at our institutions. So we take the framework, these broad pillars of the framework, and what we will be exploring, and we'll go to the next slide, please. We will be exploring in depth the Aspen's framework for leading teaching and learning on our campuses. And the president needs to own the teaching and learning strategy. And I think both Dr. Stout and Dr. Reese, shared that where the president's vision is around teaching and learning, and how the president is engaged in the conversation in teaching and learning, and where the president's relationship is to the faculty, to the external partners in this teaching and learning environment is extremely important. In this framework, we have 4 distinct areas that we'll explore over the next year, and they have to do with understanding who our students are, our faculty and our relationship with our faculty, our governance structure, and of course, always giving that national context of what we're learning from the field. In the second category, we're going to look at how we elevate faculty and what does that look like. And I think both Dr. Reese and Karen Stout were really profound in sharing with all of you about the value of the faculty, how important the faculty are to the outcomes relative to teaching and learning, and their relationship not only with the students, but the relationship with the college as a whole. And also around the conversation around professional development. And then finally, based on the things that we know and the continuous improvement that we do, how do we institutionalize the systems? How do we build the capacity and the practices to sustain these improvements? And so we'll explore these things in more depth as we continue this conversation. So back to that question, how can the president be strategic in driving an improvement in teaching and learning at the college? There is no doubt that we all are committed to the mission and the vision and the values of our organization. And our mission and vision and values speak to the quality that's learning. And as a president, how you lead with intentionality and strategic focus will really make a difference in building that culture of institutional and instructional excellence. I love that quote that Karen shared with us from Dr. Patrone. And I remember her saying this, but I also remember him saying that in one of our completion by design meetings, in which he said, if we are to meet the challenges of learning in this time of change, and definitely we are in a time of change, teaching must be central to the issue. And so it raises the question, as I said, what is the president's role? And the president needs to own the teaching and learning strategy. And you do have a bully pulpit. People listen to you. Your voice counts. Your message counts. Your passion and commitment to our students counts. And people need to see you as driving this urgency and this change. And I think we should start to put that word urgency in capital letters. We need to understand the resources that are needed for strong teaching and learning to happen on your campus, how you are going to build the capacity to make sure that that campus community is engaged and that the resources are there for them to make that difference in the classroom. We're going to look at human capital and the strategies and the implications of human capital. And above all, that holistic view that we cannot just look at teaching and learning this week, and we're going to look at equity this week, and we're going to look at completion this week. It is a blend. It's a holistic view of all of these pillars to the outcomes of our students, but keeping in mind the centrality of teaching and learning in the conversation. In addition, it is the president's role to, and this is my next slide if we can, president's role to understand, and I think Karen was really emphatic in this, about the relationship to teaching and learning with the faculty. What does that relation look like? Are we listening to our faculty? Do we understand and are we in sync between the vision of what you have and an understanding and a definition of teaching and learning and that of the faculty? What role does the faculty play on your campus and in controlling the curriculum? But what are the parameters of that conversation? How are the faculty, part of the strategies that we develop and implement on our campus, not only for the classroom instruction, but also in professional development? How do we engage and incorporate our deans and our department chairs in the implementation of the change and incorporate them also in the vision and the communication process that happens with the faculty? Are we all on the same page? Are we all singing, as we always say, from the same prayer book and the same hymnal? And then, of course, we want to look at what are our bargaining agreements set forth for the conditions of faculty employment. This was one of the pieces I think that we really probably don't spend as much time. What are our expectations? What are the expectations that we have of the faculty, and how are they engaged in defining what is excellent teaching and learning on your campus? And how do we measure that? Finally, we're going to look at some of the levels of understanding the issues around teaching and learning. And one of the big things related to this are the questions we're going to ask, the questions about, are our students learning? Is innovation happening on our campus? And who are those innovators? How do we elevate those innovators? How do we find them? How do we seek them out? How do we support them? How do we onboard faculty? How do we evaluate faculty? What does our teaching and learning center look like? How do we network with others to kind of constantly be on the cutting edge of what is good teaching and learning? What does our governance structure look like? And how are we engaged as presidents with faculty governance and the faculty as a whole? And how do we incorporate our trustees in the understanding of what is good teaching and learning and how we're measuring it on our campus? And I always love this last one about the science of teaching and learning. Teaching is an art. It is an art. And do we understand the concepts around the science of teaching and learning? And what works, what's working across our country, and how can we share the ideas, not only about the good things happening here in North Carolina, but also learn from others in the field? And then finally, as we look at the understanding of the levels of teaching and learning and understanding it as a president, keeping in mind some of these big questions. What are the important teaching and learning challenges that your institution is facing? And what are the strengths of your institution? And I believe in reflection today of our speakers, we heard both. We heard both the strengths and the challenges, but we also heard about how the president can be engaged in those conversations and move the organization, advance the mission and the outcomes for our students. Taking into consideration, and you heard this in the reflections as I looked at my notes about our speakers, about how we look at evidence, how we look at data, how we use the data to help inform us about what we need to do on our campuses. How important it is that we have not only a strong data plan, but a strong communication plan. How do we message that information to our students, to our faculty, to our staff, to our communities? How do we listen? How are we listening to what's happening on our campuses? I shared with the fellows the other day, one of the things that when I was president at Davidson, and it happens. I mean, I think sometimes you get so engaged that you need to step back a little bit. And there was a point in my career at Davidson that I had to do that. And my dad, I loved him to death, but he was a big debater, and he would always engage me in a conversation. And he would say to me in our conversations, especially if he thought I wasn't being very attentive, he would say, "Mary, are you listening to me or are you just tolerating me?" And I felt it sometimes, particularly at this point when I was looking at what was going on at the campus, that maybe that was a little bit about what the faculty was thinking. That maybe I wasn't listening to them, and that maybe I was just tolerating them. And I had to step back and really, really, really do some self-reflection about my relationship with the faculty, what they were thinking, and how it fit into the overall mission and execution of what we were doing on our campus. That's self-reflection. And listening is an art. Listening is a skill, and it is something I think that we need to really take hold of, in that, particularly that relationship between the president and the faculty. I think we need to look at our strengths, and we have to assess where we want to go. We have to take into consideration, particularly these external things that we're dealing with in this crazy time, but it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to build on our strengths and look at our challenges in a different way. Above all, I think in these conversations that we have on our campus around teaching and learning is really taking into focus an understanding of who are our champions and elevating our faculty, understanding where governance fits, what we're doing, how our boards are involved in this conversation, and how we can improve upon that relationship. And then finally, always being open to learn. So we're going to explore a number of ideas over the next few months. We're going to look at strategies, and ultimately we're going to address this framework about what does it look like to really advance teaching and learning in our institutions. So with that, I'm going to ask Millicent to share with all of you a little bit about the agenda going forward, the process and timeline. And I'm looking forward to always being with all of you. I miss you all terribly. I know you're doing terrific work. I can't thank you enough for being involved and engaged and committed to our students and our communities.
Thank you so much, Mary. And just wanted to share again how excited we are at Aspen to be embarking on this learning journey with you all as we think about leading improvement in teaching and learning from the president's seat. We're really excited to share some of the work that we've been doing and also learn from all of you as we move through this series of workshops together. So as Mary mentioned, we have plans for workshops through the President's Academy, starting today with our kickoff and moving through all the way until January of next year. So the first of the next series of workshops will be in June of this year, and we'll really focus on defining that core issue around teaching and learning, thinking through those lenses that Mary mentioned, thinking about students and what they're struggling with, thinking about faculty and where there are gaps in teaching, understanding the governance as it relates to faculty, and also thinking about teaching and learning science from the field. By the end of that session, you'll be set to really think about a core issue that you want to work on for the remainder of the 2 workshops. In the fall, we'll come back together in September for a workshop on engaging faculty innovators and really thinking about how to put those dedicated and innovative faculty at the center of teaching reform at your college. In that session, we'll explore things like faculty leadership and also think through that faculty life cycle. How are faculty hired, onboarded, promoted, and professionally developed in a way that's really well aligned to your teaching and learning vision for the institution? The final session in January, we'll focus on putting some systems and practices in place to really sustain the improvements in teaching and learning that are happening at your institution. So you'll think about strategic finance and how you can resource these reforms in a sustainable way, as well as thinking about effective data use across the institution and how that can impact your teaching and learning work. You'll leave that third session with some clear action items to continue work on the challenge that you'll be identifying in the session in June. So throughout the series of workshops, there'll be sort of a mix of self-assessment tools that we'll provide you with that can be used for you as well as to take back to your teams, opportunity to work in small groups and create action plans, and opportunity to engage with leaders in the field. So at the end of today's section, we'll be sharing some more details about registration for this series of workshops. But in the meantime, if questions come up, you can feel free to email the Belk Center team and they can direct any Aspen specific questions our way. But again, we're so excited to be with you this year, to be really diving into the teaching and learning work together and really thinking about, as Mary said, the president's role in driving the strategy. So I'll turn things back to Mary to introduce our next speakers.
Well, thank you, Millicent. And now we get an opportunity to hear from our colleagues. And joining us in this reflection piece is Rusty Hunt, President of Lenore Community College, and Garrett Henshaw, President of Catawba Valley Community College. Both Rusty and Garrett have been involved in some of the work on teaching and learning here in North Carolina. And they have a certain perspective, I think, about what is going on their campus, and also some reflections about what they see as some of the challenges and opportunities that they are facing regarding teaching and learning. So I'm going to just open it up to both of you first to just share with us a little bit about why you think the conversation and the work around teaching and learning is so important for a college president to be engaged in. And I guess we'll start with you, Garrett.
Sorry, something went wrong with my technology there, Mary. Thank you all for allowing me to be here today. And, you know, when I attended the Dallas Herring lecture and listened to Dr. Stout and her perspectives on things, it really woke me up. And I think to Mary's example of just a minute ago of that reflection time, and I started thinking about everything about our college, why we do what we do and how we do it. And just realized that we were making commitments to the wrong priorities, because teaching and learning is the core of what we do. And so we began a process here working with the Belk Center for Community College Leadership and Research of really evaluating where we were at. getting a good feel on the front end of how many gaps are out there, what areas of weakness do we need to identify, and then how do we address those. And so we did a lot of things to assess the data that came back to us, to think about how we present it. But it's about, as you heard Dr. Stout say earlier today, the intentionality of it and the consistency in messaging from the Office of the President. And the key piece of it, which is the retention and student progression data, and building that into the whole core of your system, and then having institutional outcomes that you expect every year. This is complex. This is not something that you can do in a week. We're still working to move this thing forward. But one of the first things that we did was, I felt like we needed an iconic place to be able to say, this is where we're starting. And so we developed the Center for Professional Excellence and established that here on our campus with some of our outstanding faculty, and have really been developing that as our main priority at this time, so that we can lead into getting everyone back engaged and taking advantage of the opportunity to reflect on this pandemic and the impacts it's had on us, but also to come back with a new spirit, a new focus. And that's sort of the way that we have determined is our path forward. And it's going to make a difference. There's no question in the equity and the access piece of it, and addressing all those issues simultaneously can be overwhelming, but it can be done. Rusty?
Yeah, go ahead, Rusty, please.
Thank you, Garrett. I'll just echo some of what Garrett said. It's not an overnight fix. It's one of those things, teaching and learning should have always been and should be the core of what we do as an institution. But I think as we looked, like Garrett said, you got to start somewhere. You can't do it all at one time. We did similar to what Garrett did. We started a professional development center, which was led by our faculty in collaboration with our HR office and those folks, to determine, A, what's it going to look like, what type of technology needs to be in there, what type of breakout space, what kind of equipment and that sort of stuff needs to be in there, but really what kind of learning needs to happen in that space. And how do we focus what professional development we're going to offer. So what we were doing previously before this is we had our convocation, and we did all of our professional development in one big day, and we might do something sporadically throughout the year here and there and send folks to some training sessions where they may be interested. But now we have ongoing professional development. Much of that is led by our own faculty, but we also leverage what the Student Success Center does as well. So we do some of that face-to-face. Obviously right now, a lot of it's being done virtually. But again, I think the important part of that that was faculty led as it relates to professional development. And they had a really big voice in what type of professional development that they wanted. But certainly we have to create that vision of what's important to us. And Garrett touched on that a little bit. But really it's important for us as leaders, as presidents, to really lead that charge. But in all honesty, that's only half of the game. The rest of the ball game is the faculty picking it up and taking ownership of it and really leading it from their perspective. And so I think what we've done in that realm has been good. The other thing I'll say, when AJ and her team came to visit us back in October of 2019, if I'm remembering correctly, they came out and surveyed our faculty, and obviously we saw a lot of eye-opening things that we weren't doing. We saw some things we were doing well and things that we just were not doing well. One of those things is that we weren't engaging our faculty enough on this idea of improving teaching and learning at its core. And so I set aside some money every year for what I call innovation grants. And it's just $100,000. It's not a whole lot of money, but it is enough to say, hey, I want your ideas on how we can improve student success. It can be anything. I don't want to hold you to one thing. I don't want to lead that discussion. I want it to come from you all. And so one of those things that came from that is to evaluate our online courses and the engagement and the success of those courses and that sort of stuff. But we're probably above average in the number of courses that we teach online. And so that was led by our faculty. They wanted that. And so I funded that directly for them with a group called Vertical Education, who is a third-party vendor. You all may have worked with them in the past, but they come in and they evaluate and kind of score individual courses that faculty are teaching. And I kept hands off purposefully in regard to that, so that they felt free to look at their own classes. There was no repercussions if they weren't doing it right. or anything like that. So it was up to them to kind of lead that charge. And so at this point, we started off with 20 courses and 20 faculty members. We're over 85 courses at this point with 50 faculty members, 55 faculty members that have done that. And so what we learned from that, and what the faculty learned from that is, the days of when I went to college and many of us went to college, we went to a classroom. Every classroom was roughly the same set up and all that kind of stuff. But our students, when they come access distance education in this particular case, they got 5 classes. All the 5 classes look a little bit different. They may not be organized exactly the same way. Even though we're using Moodle in all those, they may be organized differently. And so what this group did is came in and said, hey, you need to have some kind of framework and stable framework. So kind of like when you go to Walmart, you know where the electronics are in general in the store, you know where the groceries are. Your class should be that way so that students don't have that hurdle to get over when they first start that class. So they all should at least have some kind of similarities. And then of course you develop your program from that. But then how do you create it and make it an engaging program? How do you also use different modalities of teaching and learning so that folks with different learning styles can learn all those types of things, and also made us look at what assignments do you have? Why do you have them that way? Why are you using a PowerPoint versus a video? Those types of things. And so at this point, we've had about 85 courses. And again, like I said, about 55 faculty that have gone through that. And that's important because when the pandemic hit, we had started that in 2019. When the pandemic hit, we had already been working on developing some kind of model in between that kind of takes the best of face-to-face instruction and the best of online instruction and makes a synchronous environment, which many of us had done at this point. The important point for us was, as we developed that over basically a 1-month period of time to kind of get it up and running for the fall semester, is our faculty already had a framework from the work they did with vertical education as they developed the synchronous option to make sure that that was successful. So we did 65 courses in the fall. We've expanded that in the spring and got additional sections that we're doing that with. But that has really been successful to date, knock on wood. But really, I think the biggest part of that is that we let the faculty lead that charge. And we just kind of funded it and kind of viewed from a distance. And then we'll evaluate once this year is over exactly how effective those were. But I think that's been good for us.
Rusty, have you been able to identify some outcomes as a result of these changes and improvement in student outcomes?
Right. So it's interesting. So the answer is yes. Obviously, we've only got 1 full semester behind us, so it's somewhat limited at this point. But we do know, at least from our synchronous environment, we've got about a year and a half, almost a year and a half, with vertical education and online courses. So I'll tell you, let me speak about the online courses first. So interestingly, and somewhat surprisingly, our students are much more engaged. Our faculty are much more engaged with students. But what we learned is that we took a little bit of a step back. I won't say backwards, but what we learned is we had a lot of courses that were running themselves. And so they weren't engaging. Folks were passing the courses and all that kind of stuff, but there wasn't a lot of interaction. There wasn't a lot of learning, so to speak, going on in some courses, not a lot, but some courses. And so in those particular areas, you might see that it's a more challenging course than it was before, which is good. It's supposed to be challenging. But then on other courses, what we've seen is much higher student engagement, much higher student satisfaction in those courses and that sort of thing. And so, and I could tell you resoundingly, our faculty have had a positive response. So the first group of 20 faculty that went through it loved it. And so they promoted to the other faculty who jumped on board quickly as we kind of made those opportunities available for those folks. So from that perspective, the faculty love it, have really been responsive. And again, it's because it was their idea as much as anything else. But we have seen that. It's still too early to say on all the student data yet, because it's not been long enough, but I think over time, over this next year, we'll be able to kind of compare pre-vertical education to post. As it relates to synchronous, what we learned in the fall semester is the students really love the flexibility. They love to be able to have face-to-face interaction with faculty from home if they want to do that, or if they want to come sit in the classroom, they could do that. And if they had a child that was sick, or they had to go to the doctor, or they couldn't make the class for that particular time frame, everything we did, we recorded the video. We also, with our smartboard technology, all that stuff was uploaded into Moodle, so they could access that course stuff that night. So you're not losing anything, and you're still getting that somewhat face-to-face interaction, even if you downloaded it at night, but you saw the whole lecture, and you've got the notes from the class and all that kind of stuff. That really is, when I was going to school, I was sitting there feverishly taking notes and that sort of stuff. Now you don't have to. You can sit and pay attention and learn, knowing that that stuff's already uploaded in your Moodle class. So I think that helps from that engagement, but also just from the learning aspect.
Thank you. Both of you really have engaged the faculty. You've developed teaching and learning centers for your faculty. You're committed to professional development, and you're looking at strategies that you can incorporate overall that are sustainable and that the outcomes will improve for our students. But one of the pieces I'd like to ask you, Garrett, though, has to do with this conversation and about equity. And how have you incorporated the equity and guided pathways in your teaching and learning work? And how have you messaged that value of equity to the faculty and the incorporation, embedding that in the conversations with them and for our students and for the outcomes you're really seeking for?
The first thing, Mary, was we had to redefine what valuing means for everyone, and that's our non-negotiable core. Every single person that comes into our campus, we need to assure that our frameworks, that our learning technique, our teaching techniques, that our methods of delivery, that they are reaching all the target audiences and providing that support that they need. And it's when a lot of our faculty are part-time, and we're having to put things together to assure that there's consistency there. I think the biggest thing with the equity piece, when you're looking at evaluating, the student progression from one course to the next, the learning outcomes being achieved, the competencies being achieved, is to take the time to really dig deep into the data, assess what is happening with specific demographics, specific student groups, and then see where the variances are and try to work with the information that you have to make the changes that are necessary, because it's a lot easier to keep doing the same stuff we've always done. And that big change of building our whole foundation around the valuing of individuals, the valuing of that equity and access, and then working with our community and carrying these, again, I go back to consistent messages so that the community is hearing that we are focusing in on these issues, and that we're making moves to assure that things don't just continue the way they've always continued. And I think, as people continue to hear that, they become engaged with it, but they also want to see what's changed, and they want to challenge us. And I love that part of it. It's when you can put something together that creates that challenge for excellence. And I think, the big thing with the pathways and assuring that we're getting a level of equal quality and equal delivery, equal success across the board for all of our students lets people know that they are welcome here and that they can achieve here. And I want to go back to one thing that was talked about earlier, and that is take a close look in the mirror at who your faculty and staff are, because that does make a difference. And I've heard it be said time and time again. We didn't look like our community when I first got here. And so we embraced this early, that we had to do some intentional things, not just hope somebody shows up or whatever, but we did intentional things to diversify our faculty and staff, and to make sure that those issues stay on the forefront of our priorities every year, with specific outcomes for development for each individual, but also making sure that onboarding process is of quality, and that we are focusing on the necessary intentional actions that we're going to have to invest in working with our part-time faculty, because really that's one of our biggest challenges, is spending that quality time together. You've got to spend time to have conversations, and a lot of these people have other jobs. So figuring out how to work within those dynamics is what we're focused on as we speak today, and we're having a session on that tomorrow, as a matter of fact.
That's great. I mean, what you mentioned about the adjuncts, our part-time faculty, is really critical. And I think that, you know, even as Rusty's doing his work on his on his campus, and you look at the data and you start disaggregating the data, you're going to learn something, you know, and the value of not only professional development for our full-time faculty, but also for our adjuncts, and that their voice matters as well. And then also who are teaching our students, the diversity of our faculty and then the diversity of our staff is extremely important as we look at the equity piece on our campuses. So Rusty and Garrett, we could talk to you for hours, as you know that, and you have so much to share with all of us, but unfortunately time is oftentimes our enemy. And so we're going to move on now, and I'm going to have Millicent lead us now into a breakout group. Thank you guys very much.
Hi everyone, Millicent had to dip out, but I'll take us into our breakouts. You're going to be shifting into small groups to discuss the Aspen teaching and learning framework a little bit more, and specifically the president's role in owning teaching and learning at the college. The discussion questions are in your participant guide and also in the chat. You'll have a facilitator with you in your group, and we'll reconvene at 1:55. We will see you all then.
Yanked out of the room and pulled into the other room, but welcome back. Thank you for those great discussions, and I think I'm going to do just a minute of closeout here and then turn it back over to my colleague AJ at Belk Center. But I just want to thank you all on behalf of the Aspen Institute. Thank you for letting us be a partner with you all in this. I want to say that we're looking forward to working with you over the next few months, and that this really is a starting point for us as well. We find, you know, the remarks that Dr. Karen Stout made this morning and Dr. Reese and all of you really provocative, and we don't have all the answers on how to do this. What we know, I think, from our work nationally is that it's really important, and that where colleges are seeing really sustained student focus work, where they're really taking things like guided pathways and turning those into real successes for students, that there is this really important role that you all as leaders, as the presidents of these institutions, play in defining that vision for teaching and excellence. And so we're just grateful to have the opportunity to learn alongside you all and to continue to engage these questions. So thank you for having us, and I'll turn it back to you, AJ.
Thanks, Keith, for your comments and for being a partner in this process. As we wrap up our first teaching and learning session, our kickoff, I too want to thank all of you for using your valuable time to attend, to participate, to discuss and engage. I'm thinking about Dr. Stout's comments. She really reminded us today that faculty are these incredibly crucial actors in building student scalable change. She asked us about, you know, what are our venues we are using to listen to our faculty, and are they the key stakeholders in our conversations about teaching and learning excellence? And she noted that presidents can empower faculty by shaping and owning their own teaching and learning vision for their institutions. And then Dr. Reese built on Dr. Stout's message and suggested that presidents need to lean in on their vision and expectations for teaching and learning. He said it was this both delicate and bold balance, which I really appreciated as presidents engage in the teaching function and vision of the institution. And then he identified 3 of his items as his vision, which I thought were helpful in terms of saying teaching and learning excellence must be grounded in equity. He noted that presidents need to highlight, showcase, mobilizing their master teachers to support other teachers through mentoring and job or shadowing experiences. And then finally, he said it was important to showcase the talents of the faculty to external stakeholders, and gave examples of that. And then we heard from both President Hunt and Hinshaw about their teaching and learning work and how they chose to focus on student success efforts through classroom experience and excellence. And I appreciated the messages about being consistent and intentional in terms of messaging from the president, that it is a long process, and that the teams need to reflect their communities. So I appreciated the messages, national, local, from each of you and our individual conversations. And as I said, we're grateful for our College Excellence Program partners for achieving the Dream Partners, and thank you to our team at the Belk Center for coordinating. I hope that you will continue with us in the next 3 sessions, June, September, and January. The registration link for June 10th session will be available this afternoon, and we ask that you actually register by March because we have a pre-package of information coming, and that information will be distributed on April 1st. But of course, the President's Academy team will be sending additional follow-up information. But please do also mark your calendars for our presidential conversations, which will build on this work as well as other information you're interested in having us prepare. So finally, I ask you just to take 2 minutes before you log off today, actually maybe 1 minute even, so that you can get to your next 2 o'clock session to give us feedback. Your words of feedback, ideas really help us drive the rest of our agenda. So all of that information are in links and will be sent to you. And thank you so much for being with us today.